Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
All right, welcome to our deep dive into what, so what, now what. I think this is going to be a really fascinating one, especially with what you were telling us about some of your team dynamics, needing a little bit of help.
Yeah, it's interesting, this W-cubed framework. It's almost like having these mental tools to analyze a situation, right?
Yeah, and it's supposed to help you make, better decisions, like after you've all had this shared experience, almost like, I don't know, a debrief, but more intense.
Yeah, it's like a structured way to debrief. And it's kind of wild how you could use this for like so many things, not just teams, but personal stuff too.
Okay, so let's break this down, this W cubed. So first you've got the what? And we're talking like just the facts here.
Exactly. It's all about getting everyone on the same page before anyone jumps to conclusions.
Right, like just the objective observations, kind of like when, a detective walks into a crime scene, they're just looking at clues.
Yeah, gathering information. Instead of like fingerprints, you're looking at, what are the facts?
But isn't there a risk there of getting bogged down in the details? Like just stating facts can feel a bit basic sometimes.
That's where the so what comes in. That's where things get interesting. It's like connecting the dots,
So we go from just listing what we observe to thinking about why it matters.
Exactly. Moving from observation to analysis. Figuring out the significance.
Do you give an example, like in a real situation, how that might play out?
Sure. So remember you were talking about those team meetings where it felt like some people were just totally checked out, quiet.
Yeah.
That's your what?
Yeah.
People weren't participating. But the so what is, well, why? Why is that important? Maybe you realize if you think back that this started happening, right after a specific decision was made.
Ah, so maybe they disagreed with it but didn't speak up. So instead of just seeing quiet people, we try to understand why.
Right. And then that deeper understanding leads you to the now what.
So that's where we decide, okay, what action do we take based on all this?
Exactly. So in that meeting example, your now what might be, okay, let's revisit that decision. Give those quieter people a chance to, voice their concerns.
That's interesting, but I mean, doesn't it get a bit overthinky? Like this whole, so what, could we end up just, stuck in our heads?
It's a valid point.
Yeah.
That's why a tool like the ladder of inference can be super helpful.
Oh, right. I remember that from the material. Could you just refresh my memory on how that works again?
Basically, it shows how we jump from seeing something to taking action without really examining our thought process in between.
So like we make assumptions without even realizing it.
Exactly. We observe something, but then we select certain details, and those usually confirm what we already believe, right? So we interpret them based on our own assumptions, jump to a conclusion, and then act.
And that whole chain of thinking could be flawed.
Exactly.
Okay, so this ladder of imprints helps us be more aware of those leaps we're making in our heads. So we don't jump to the wrong conclusions, especially when working with other people.
Yeah. And that awareness makes your now what stage much more effective.
So instead of just brainstorming random actions, we're choosing ones that really fit what we figured out.
And when everyone feels like they've been heard, it increases the likelihood of success, right?
That makes sense. But how do we even get to those objective observations, in those meetings where it feels like utter chaos?
Good point. Yeah, sometimes what isn't so easy to figure out. That's where the person leading this W-cubed thing has a big role to play.
So it's almost like having like a W-cubed referee to keep things on track.
Exactly. They might even use specific techniques. For example, having everyone write down their observations individually before talking about them.
Ooh, that's clever. So even when it's messy, there are ways to make it work.
And that's kind of the beauty of it, it's flexible.
That's good to know. But before we jump into the now what, I am curious about, using this in other situations, not just team meetings.
Absolutely. We saw how the source material mentioned things like feedback and even conflict resolution.
Yeah. Lots of possibilities.
We should definitely explore those more in our next segment.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it. Okay, so we've tackled those, difficult team meetings. But what about using this for giving feedback? That always feels so tricky to me.
Yeah, feedback can be a minefield for sure. But that's where I think this, what, so what, now what can really help. Because it takes it away from being, about judgment. And makes it more of a collaborative thing.
So instead of saying, like, you messed this up, it's more like, okay, what actually happened here?
Yeah, and then so what? What impact did it have? And then now what? what can we do differently moving forward?
I see. So it keeps it focused on solving the problem, not making it personal. And this works whether you're giving the feedback or receiving it.
Exactly. If you're giving the feedback, it forces you to slow down, right?
Yeah.
Really think about the why behind what you observed.
That makes sense. Takes some of the heat out of it. But what about using this for, actual conflict resolution? That seems even harder.
Well, think about it. A lot of conflicts happen because people are seeing the same event, but interpreting it differently. So by going through this W-cubed process together, you can kind of uncover those, root causes.
So it's like instead of arguing, each person could start by saying, okay, from my perspective, here's what happened.
Right. And then what meaning did you take from that?
And then finally, okay, now knowing all this, what can we do to actually fix it?
You got it. So you're building that shared understanding first.
Yeah.
Before you jump into solutions.
I've got to admit, I'm someone who usually avoids conflict, like hope it just goes away on its own. But this sounds like a way to actually address it, in a safe way.
Yeah, it gives you that framework, like a shared language.
And it's not just for conflict between, like, two people, right? I mean, this could be a team thing or even...
Oh, absolutely. Anywhere there are different perspectives clashing. Communities, even bigger societal issues.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. But what about on a more personal level? Could I use this if I'm, like, trying to achieve a goal but keep hitting roadblocks?
Definitely. In fact, the source material actually talked about that specifically, using it for personal growth.
So it's like, instead of just letting things happen to me, I can use this to reflect, make better choices about how I move forward.
Exactly. Let's say you have a goal, but you're stuck. So what's been happening? What patterns am I noticing in how I'm approaching this?
Right. And then, so what? What might those patterns be telling me about, my strength, my weaknesses?
And then now what? Do I need to tweak my strategy, adjust my approach somehow?
It's like having a coach, but for my own life. I like that. Honestly, when we started, I thought, so what, now what? Sounded kind of basic.
Yeah, it sounds deceptively simple.
But now I see how much potential it has. It could help someone be a better, leader, communicator, just a better person overall.
It's all about making those conscious choices, to actually learn from your experiences.
Well, we've definitely uncovered a lot here, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more to explore with what, so what, now what.
All right, deep divers, get ready to go even deeper because we'll be right back to wrap up our exploration of this framework. Okay, so we've seen how this what, so what, now what can be used for, like, all sorts of things. But is there a wrong way to do it?
That's what I find so interesting about this. The source material makes it really clear that it's not meant to be like this rigid formula.
So it's not about following like a script or something. It's more the idea behind it.
Exactly. It's more like, when you're learning a new dance step. At first, you're really focused on the instructor's steps, but eventually you kind of find your own flow.
I like that. So how do we get to that point with this framework where we're not just like copying what we read, but making it work for us?
Honestly, it's just practice. The more you actually use this, the easier it gets.
So it's like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Exactly. Like you're training a muscle. It might feel awkward at first, but the more you use it, it becomes second nature.
So we should aim to make it a habit, like a regular part of how we approach things.
Exactly. And that might mean different things for different people. Maybe you build it into your team's meetings, or you use it when you're, doing some self-reflection.
It's almost like giving yourself that pause to check in.
Right. Like asking yourself those three questions. What? So what? Now what? Whenever you're trying to figure something out.
It's like a mental checklist to keep you grounded.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more you'll start to notice these little moments where it can make a difference.
You'll start to see things you didn't before and make better decisions.
Right. Decisions that actually make sense based on what you've learned.
Well, I have to say, this has been eye-opening. It feels like I've been given a new way to understand, everything.
And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It puts you in the driver's seat of your own learning.
So as we wrap up our deep dive on what, so what, now what, Krang, I want to leave you with this. Think about those team dynamics we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, how could you use this framework to maybe improve your meetings or address some of that, tension that's been building up?
Great questions to consider. And remember, this whole deep dive was tailored for you. So I encourage you to give this a try, see how it works for you. We'd love to hear about your experiences.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.